So welcome everyone. This is Tracy with the Montana State Library, and I have with me Pam Henley. The two of us have been asked to kind of talk to you today about project planning and management. I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it over to Pam. She's going to start the first part of talking about what we're going to cover in Project Management 101, and then later on I will talk about logic models and one tool for planning. So Pam, take it away.
Alrighty, thanks a bunch. And we have a nice group here today. So this is what we're going to do today in the webinar. We're going to just find out from you, how is your team doing? And update us. Then we're going to talk about the learning outcomes for this webinar, the things that we hope you get out of it. Then we'll have a little basic 101 about project management. What are the phases of project management and why is it useful? Then Tracy's going to move on to starting with the end in mind and moving into the details, the logic model. So we'll run through a little logic model exercise and project planning. Then we'll talk a little bit about evaluating, and we'll also show you one tool that we've gotten a little bit of practice with at the State Library of Asana, but there are other things out there. So that's what we're going to start with. So we'll start out with, how are your teams doing? And I'll go ahead and just report what Jeannie reported earlier before we started, that they had 18 at their book discussion group, and they're very excited and making connections. So that's what that group is doing. Oops, sorry, I thought we had a picture of the groups here. Went too far. But go ahead. Either speak or type in the chat box of how your team's doing.
Joe, I was just going to, oops, I should say Pam. I should just say, too, we went to our school superintendent here, and he gave all of his teachers OPI credit for the book discussion group. So if they do the book discussion group and the classes, they will get 16 hours of continuing ed credit.
Ooh, that's cool.
So, yeah, that was a big draw to get a lot of people here.
Excellent. Pam Carlton would like to be the presenter. Do you have something to show us, Pam? Because I'm happy to make you the presenter.
I'm not sure why that says I want to be the presenter. I don't.
Oh, you don't care?
No.
I'm thinking, okay, Pam, I will, but it's fun.
No, how did that happen?
I don't know. It's okay. I won't make you presenter. It's fine.
No, I mean, I can certainly tell you what we've done so far.
Excellent.
I think that, well, anyway, we haven't gotten nearly as far as we want to, but we are working on condensing what we have so that our first opportunity to deliver a workshop similar to what we all went through will be started in this October for the Empower Place staff. Now, Empower Place it's a cooperative effort between the food bank, Spectrum Discovery Area, and the library. And it's a place for kids to play, learn. It's attached to the food bank so that a lot of parents and kids come just, while they're waiting to shop or afterwards, before. So there's quite a large number of kiddos and their adults who come through there. The library offers 2 programs a week. Spectrum offers, I don't know how many programs a week. So there's a lot of staff interaction with the kids and with the parents. And what we're finding is, given the clientele who end up using Empower Place, exactly the clientele that they wanted, those folks who are somewhat disadvantaged in one way or another, they need assistance in learning how to interact with their kids, or what's the best way to approach a problem. And so we wanted to first go through the workshop with the staff of Empower Place, and then we were going to offer it for the parents and other caregivers for Empower Place, or that go to Empower Place. So, like I said, Amanda and I are kind of partway through getting it all ready to rock and roll in 1st of October so that we can do the staff. And then it'll be easy to just, well, not easy, but we'll kind of have things, we'll see what worked, what didn't work in our first attempt with the staff, and then we'll have a better understanding of how to proceed with the parent caregiver study or workshop.
That's really good. I mean, that is a really good start, and you will be busy.
Yes, we will. In some ways, it's like, oh gosh, can we postpone it another month? But no, we won't.
So we do have a lot in chat also, so I'll just read through that real quick. So Megan says Bozeman Belgrade Group will be presenting 4 sessions for parents and child care providers in January and February. They're presenting the short version of the introduction to our early childhood council group in October as a trial run. That'll be good. I think we had some, well, Cindy on last week's thing also mentioned some of this too, but this is good to hear. And Danielle from Lewistown is saying, we have really enjoyed our summer, which everyone last week said too, but right now we're planning on talking with the daycare providers in town and providing presentations directly to them. And Mary Drew is saying, our team had success with 2 summer programs, but overall, partnering with the school district brought up 2 problems. One, they are already invested in a framework called Deeper Learning, and they are not going to move or invest in Mind in the Making. Next, school employees are gone all summer. In particular, my 2 team members were out of the country most of the summer, so we have not met since June. And that was pretty typical in some other people last week that said summer was just so busy they haven't had a chance to even get started. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped Danielle's second comment about her summer, that when she was talking about them providing presentations directly to them, she meant the child care providers that are working at Head Start and our other child care provider, Small Wonder. So it'll be those child care providers. Any other comments or questions about what teams are doing? Because I know summer's a busy time and it's difficult. And I also feel like I have my slides out of order. It couldn't possibly be, but I really thought we were starting with reporting what everybody was doing instead of looking at the outcome. No. Okay, so let's move on to the learning outcomes that we're hoping you will get out of this today. We're going to hopefully develop a basic understanding of project management and practices and identify success and build a project that attempts to achieve those outcomes. I'm going to, I can't, oh, maybe I can. I'm sorry, I muted Mary Drew just because I think we're getting some noise from her phone. So students will learn about logic models and how to use them in project planning and learn about Asana, one of those tools in project management. And here's what I was hoping we would get to is, how's your team doing? In case you don't remember everybody on the team, here's our really fun photo that we had. But we'll move on. All right, now we're going to talk about Project Management 101, a real basic overview, because this can be a really long-term course to go through. So we're going to cover just some highlights. So get ready to type in the chat box, because I'm going to ask you to answer the question of, what is a project? If we're going to do project management, we should probably have a clear idea of what is it we're talking about. So do you have any kind of definition of a project in mind that you can share with the rest of us? And I always feel like we should just play a little music in the background while we wait for people to type, because I know it takes a while to type, to think and then type.
But silence can be so motivating.
Yes. Yes. All right. Jeannie has completed her short answer. This is good. Jeannie says, a short or long-term program to improve or educate the public in a specific area. And Mary Drew says something that requires planning to accomplish. And these are both good. And I'll keep watching in case anybody else has an answer. And I think you covered a lot of it. It is a short or long-term project. It's something that's temporary, that has a definite start and end, and will produce something unique, a product or a result, an activity. Megan says an activity with a specific outcome or goal. Those are all really good definitions to go through. It's not a long-term thing, or it could be kind of long-term, but it's not ongoing forever, and it has a definite start and end, and will produce something unique. That's basically what a project is. So let's move on to the next question then. Why is management important? And while you're thinking, I see that Angie has joined us, so we might, in a few minutes, I'll let her think for a minute. We'll have her give us an update on a project, their project also. But hi, Angie, I'm glad you could make it. Jeannie is commenting that poor planning equals poor programs, and that's probably a true statement. So if we want to have a good program, we need to do some good planning, and hopefully we'll give you some tips on how to do some good planning today. Megan says management makes sure everyone is working towards the same goal, and that's a good thing too. Mary Drew says, I think keeping track of progress and managing the details to reach your outcome. And yeah, it's keeping track of all this. Pam says, typically a project needs to have more than one person involved to get all the different facets accomplished. The manager makes sure we are all working towards that goal. And Danielle says, keeping goals in mind. You guys actually have a really good handle on why management is important. So I'm hoping I'll just reinforce a lot of what you're already thinking. Before we get started on that, though, Angie, do you want to, either in chat or if you have a microphone, want to just give us an update on a project, on your project? I'll give you a minute to think about that. Or if you're like everyone else and have had a really busy summer, you may just be able to say, I've had a really busy summer and we haven't had a chance to get started, which is okay too. So continuing on project management, and if Angie, if you put a comment in the chat box, I'll read it when it comes through, so it's okay. So there are 4 phases of project management, at least this is the common idea of project management. The first one is the conception and initiation. And I also want to say that when you're talking about projects, a lot of the work is done up front. Oh, good. Angie did say, I had a really busy summer, but planned my project in a month. That's excellent. So you can just keep us posted next month and after that. But thanks for putting that in there. When you start your project, you need to do a lot of work up front. I know if you're like me, it's like, oh, I really want to get started on this. I have this great idea and I want to do it. But if you take the time to go through these first couple of phases where you do a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, a lot of the planning, then when you finally do get to the project, it runs so much more smoothly. So it's a lot of work up front and then you can get started. So in the conception and initiation phase, this is where you just start with the question of what's the problem that you're looking at? What's the reason you need to come up with some kind of solution? Who is it that you're going to be targeting? Who's your audience that you're trying to help out or work towards? What will a successful completion of this look like? What are you hoping to get? What's an outcome you're wanting to do? And what deliverables or product or result are you hoping to get? So you want to start by asking all those questions and sitting down and thinking through that, identifying what kind of risks are there involved in this particular project or undertaking, and what kind of options do you have? Is there more than one way to deal with it? If you can come up with some kind of statements of why the project is important and why others could support it. That makes it easier when you get to the next phase and you might be looking for some funding. You'll already have a nice, clear statement of why somebody should be able to help you with some funding. Any comments or thoughts about this conception and initiation stage? So after you've had a chance to think and work through some of those questions, then you can move on to the define and plan phase. And this is where you start getting a little bit more organized. You create your team. You can figure out who are the stakeholders who might be involved or have an interest in this. Talk about what things are you going to call deliverables, like the program or product or results that you're hoping for. This is where you also want to start thinking about the timeline for your project and what benchmarks might you want to meet along the way. And also think about evaluation. Evaluation is something that you should think about from the very beginning, instead of after you've done something, you think, oh, now we need to evaluate how that went. If you can put your evaluation plan in the very beginning, you'll know what you need to be measuring along the way. You might even be able to start out with any kind of needs assessment. That would be a good baseline for your evaluation, and then you can do evaluation along the way and see how you're progressing. When you're doing this organization stage here, you want to have a manager, which we've kind of talked about. The manager will be able to coordinate and facilitate all the other little groups you might have. It'd be really nice if you have someone who's objective and can not try to direct the project one way or the other, where they really want to see a specific outcome. Sometimes in our little projects that we're talking about, it might be hard to get someone who's neutral, but if you can, that would be really helpful. This is where you want to start talking about funding if you do need funding, and you already have your statement of why the project is important, and that's where you can present those to your funders. You want to create a project charter, which is kind of basically a written contract where everyone knows what's going on. It goes back to keeping everyone informed that we mentioned earlier in some of your answers about management. When you're thinking about your budget, you want to keep in mind things of time and quality and money, because they're all going to affect each other. If you want to get something done fast, you may have to sacrifice a little bit on the quality, or if you want to cut down on the costs, you may have to cut down on the time frame or the quality. So kind of keep that in mind. Those things are like the three factors that all affect each other. You also want to put together your communication plan now, and that's a good idea. It tells who's going to be informed and how often you're going to be communicating and who needs to know what. So that's good to keep that in mind up front also. So Mary Drew asks, will a charter say who is responsible for what? I think that's probably a good thing to put in there, of who's responsible for what. I would say you certainly could include that in your project charter if you want to get into details like that. I think that's what I've heard people talk about when they put their charters together, is they do put those details in there. So to answer your question, yes, you might want to outline that there. We kind of talked about a timeline and benchmarks, so you can talk about what milestones are good. Are there some things that have to be done before others? Is there a sequencing involved where you can't move on to this step until you've already completed some earlier ones? You might want to lay those out and specify that too. And also the important thing to put in here, which I think would go in the project charter too, is who's authorized to make changes. And when you have changes, they need to be documented and everyone needs to be informed. That would be part of your communication plan. So that's a lot to go through in this phase, but you can see that if you get these two phases done, even though they will take a lot of time, then when you're ready to move on to the launch and execute stage, you're pretty much ready to go. Which isn't going to mean that it is going to go totally smoothly, because projects typically don't always go smoothly, but if you've thought through a lot of these things already, you're ready to deal with whatever obstacles and things that might come up. So you just keep evaluating along the way as your project is going. And now that we know your project has gone smoothly, you're all done, you've completed it however long it took, then you want to move into the close and evaluate phase. And this is an important one that we usually forget about. You certainly want to have some more evaluation. You want to be able to report whatever success you had and talk about lessons learned that you might have figured out along the way. If you're ever going to do this again, how would you do it better? And it's also important to do just to celebrate the completion so that the people who worked on it, all the team members and everyone who was involved can celebrate, because it's nice to have a little final celebration and ending so that you feel like, oh, we have accomplished something here, and talk about it. The other thing to keep in mind, and I know I've been in projects where we never thought about this, is a handoff process. So now that you've done this project, because we know it's just a short-term start and end thing, is then someone going to be responsible for this going forward? Because maybe you've developed some nice little program and you've built up an audience and there's a lot of interest, and now your pilot has stopped. Well, what are you going to do? Are you just going to drop everything and abandon your audience, or do you have a plan of how you're going to sustain this if it's successful? So you want to keep that in mind in your closing and evaluation plan. Are there other questions about this? Because I know I covered it really quickly, but those are the 4 phases. And if you do a lot of that work up front, it should go a lot more smoothly than if you just jump into an idea, which is what we tend to do. At least I know I've been there. All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tracy and her starting with the end in mind and logic model section.
All right. Thank you, Pam. So I mentioned this on the last recording, and I'll say this for those of you who are on this webinar, is I certainly consider myself to be an accidental project manager. I never really had much training on it, and probably wouldn't mind having a day-long training, because I can see when I have used it how it's helped me out. And one of those key pieces is that first phase that Pam talked about, and I think is so important that I repeated it before jumping into logic models. And some of you may have read Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he actually has a habit of starting with the end in mind. It's thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Before you even get into the details of your project, it's asking yourself, what problem am I trying to solve here, or what am I trying to achieve exactly? And with your work in mind in the making, I'm talking big picture. I'm talking about probably what's your ultimate goal, which is to kind of help kids gain these 7 executive functioning skills so that they can be successful in life. And you start there because by doing that and defining what that is, you can begin to work your way backwards in figuring out, okay, if I want kids to have these 7 executive functioning skills, what do I and my partners need to do to get them those skills? And you'll start to move your way into more and more details. And that's why it's valuable to make sure you're thinking about what it is you're ultimately trying to accomplish at the beginning, and why Pam spent so much time on that first phase of conception and initiation, because that's really where you sort of start to set up the target to actually achieve what it is you're going to accomplish. And it's also where you can create and be able to define for funders or granting organizations why you need the money you need to achieve your project. So Pam, if you'll go ahead and move to the next slide, I will talk about logic models. This is just one project planning tool, and a logic model to me, it's the step in between those 4 phases that Pam was talking about, the conception and initiation, and then the planning phase. That's kind of the first step. The logic model is taking that information and putting it into one format. And then the last piece that I'm going to show you is just one tool for managing how you actually get the work done. I like logic models. We use them here at the State Library quite a bit, but I'm going to say up front, one thing I don't like about this picture is it implies that it's linear, and it also implies that you start with the stuff you need to do your project, when in reality, you should begin with those things on the right, the outcome and the impact. Now, because in America we read left to right, I'm going to go ahead and start with the left-hand side, but I just wanted to say at the beginning, really, you should have all of this information in place before you start your logic model, and you should start on that right-hand side. So the very first thing is the most concrete, and those are your inputs. Inputs are the things you need to get your project done. And you can see that's a pretty common sense list there. Money, staff, equipment, supplies, and so forth. Outputs are rather interesting, I think. Outputs are your deliverables. And so that would be like in the case of Jeannie, her book club group, that's an output. The actual discussion of the book is an output. Interestingly enough, the number of people who attended that book club discussion, that is also an output. And I think that's something that isn't always clear when people are working with logic models. They sometimes think that the number of people who attended a program or the number of programs that were held, that that's an outcome, but it's not. Because outcomes are about the individual user, and they're about some kind of change that happened to the user as a result of attending that book discussion group. So did they have a change in knowledge? Did they increase their knowledge about the 7 executive functioning skills? Did they have a change in behavior? Are they actually applying what they learned during that book discussion group? Did they have a change in attitude from perhaps thinking they couldn't overcome any problems to understanding and realizing that they had everything they needed to achieve and overcome their problems? Or did they have an actual change in status? Those are outcomes because they're about the individual user. This is as opposed to outputs, which are about the number of users. So, Jeannie's 18 people at her book discussion group is an output. Now, what she's looking for is, what are those people who came to that book discussion group doing with what they learned, and did they learn anything? Those are outcomes. And then the final step in this logic model are impacts, and those are written from the perspective of a larger stakeholder, like your community. And so you kind of ask yourself questions like, well, what does those people who attended the book discussion group, what does their knowing about Mind in the Making do for the community as a whole? And you hope that it's that ultimate goal that I referred to in the previous slide, that kids are gaining these 7 executive functioning skills and using them and being more successful in life. And so you can see from this image, it's talking about typically larger community issues or things that people care about, like lower dropout rates or increased employment levels. It's kind of the community as a whole. That's when you're talking about impacts. Now, something I would say here is impacts can be difficult for us to measure, because the truth is, when you look at things like lowering a dropout rate or helping kids succeed in school, there's a variety of factors that go into making that happen, and that's okay. A lot of times you can use national studies or even international studies to show the impact. And this is something we talked about in the previous webinars. We suspect that the folks who are created Mind in the Making have done studies that you can use to show the impact of. Where you may want to focus your energies is in showing how you achieve those outcomes, showing whether or not people learned something, and showing whether or not people are using that information. And the third webinar actually talks about this measuring project success, and that's what Pam was talking about when she said you actually want to think about evaluation at the beginning. And the reason you want to do that is you're trying to think about, how will I know my project achieved what I wanted it to achieve? And if you ask yourself that at the beginning, it can help you reveal what kinds of things you should look for to either show success or show that you need to make an adjustment. So I kind of packed a ton of information about logic models into that. Does anyone have any questions for me? Or Pam, would you like to add anything?
I don't have anything to add, but I do like the idea that really the important things are on the right-hand side there, even though it does look like it's left or right. But really, we need to, I don't know, change those arrows to just point the other way or something. I don't know. But yeah, a lot of that initial work is more in the right-hand side of that chart.
Mhm.
Mary Drew asks, are there any other famous logic models out there?
There's probably a ton of different formats for logic models. I think the truth is, knowing how the human mind works, it really should be like a tornado, and that's really hard to wrap your head around when you're trying to understand. Because I think we've all been there where you think, oh, I'll do this, and then you end up backing up 2 steps and doing something different. So I think the most important part is that you have all the pieces, and you have a better chance of having success with your project if you have all the pieces. Oh,
I even think if you just Google logic model, you'll come up with a lot of different options out there. And, some of them may visually just make more sense to people rather than this particular layout. So and I think they do have very similar pieces to them. So it's just find the one that you think works best for you.
yeah. Well, Mary Drew, it is pretty cool if you want to check out logic models.
Oopsie. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine, Pam, actually. I think that's the logical next step.
Okay.
I will certainly scan the chat for questions because I know sometimes I have to think on it a little bit before I know my question. So feel free to throw your questions into the chat. But I wanted to actually try this because I just think it just makes more sense if you do it. Most of us as learners and as adults, if we try something and build on what we already know, we're more likely to kind of get a deeper kind of learning going on, which is really what I'm hoping for here. And we are going to do this logic model first thinking about the individual. And I think I noticed in most of yours as I was looking through the chats and what your projects are, your current projects are really about, I think, getting the information about mind in the making out there. And so let me ask you, what is one thing you hope participants in your trainings, in your presentations, what are you hoping they learn, do, or change as a result of going to your presentation or training? And Jeannie, feel free to translate that into the book discussion group. So what do you hope people learn, do, or change as a result of your presentations or trainings? And you can use chat, or you can actually speak with your mic. That's okay too.
I think for our book discussion group, what I'm seeing happen, which is wonderful, is that I have homeschool moms, public school moms, grandparents who have inherited children, teachers, preschool educators, daycare providers, and they're all coming together and really starting to have an understanding of each other's different perspectives. And it's just we're seeing a lot of connecting, a lot of, oh, you should come and do this with my classroom, or oh, you should come and do this at my daycare, or my kids would really like to participate in this. And so I think just seeing a bigger world out of bigger than what they just are used to dealing with is probably one of the best and most unexpected outcomes that we're seeing.
I like that. This is Pam C. Aside for us, I think aside from, learning techniques to help them deal with their children or help their kids succeed, one of the outcomes I really hope for once we start having this workshop with Empower Place caregivers is I want them to actually take away a network of people, of other adults that they can call on when they're feeling frustrated or what have you. Because I think a lot of the time it's difficult when you've got little kids especially, and these people are in crisis, a lot of them. And just to know that, you know, maybe there's just that one other person out there that they can talk to, I think would be a great thing, a great outcome for us.
So that's very...
I can read through. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say that's very similar to Jeannie's connect with each other.
Yeah.
That's a definite outcome because it's about the users. And I saw that there were some other chats as well. And Pam, make sure I go all the way back, but I believe Mary Drew's is the first one. I hope people understand better how children learn. And that is, I'm going to go ahead and talk about this right now. There are what are called short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. And I share this with you because it can be difficult and challenging to measure long-term outcomes. That's where you really get into the powerful stuff, where you're really making a difference in people's lives. And so I want to encourage you, if you do decide I would like to try this logic model and use it, put some short-term outcomes in there. And you can measure whether or not people understand better how children learn. Or in Jeannie's case, the one she gave, understanding each other's perspective, because you can ask the participants if that occurred. And that helps you take a little measurement of your success in achieving that short-term outcome. Now that can then shift into more intermediate long-term outcomes, which are the things like connecting them to each other or having them work with each other and help each other on presentations. Those are really powerful, but they're longer-term outcomes. So I think Danielle had learned a common vocabulary to keep the ideas presented in mind and the making present in our community. And that's another one of those outcomes that you can measure. And you can even measure that one in a different way from just asking the presenters. You can measure it with your own observation, seeing when you go to meetings with these other individuals, are they actually using that vocabulary? So these are just different ways that you can measure them. It's very difficult to talk about logic models and not talk about measures of project success. All right, so I think I captured all of the potential outcomes, including Pam's about having a network to call on for help during a program. So now let's take it to the next step, which is the second question on this slide, and it's about impact. How does people being connected to each other or having this network, how does that make a difference for the community or families? Why does that matter? Did you notice that we didn't warn you that you would have to do some hard thinking after lunch?
Yeah, it'll get your brain going. I can just kind of feel brain waves are really working, getting charged, so I'm sure we'll see some answers right away. I kind of wish that GoToMeeting would have the little indicator along the bottom of so-and-so is typing, so that you know that someone is typing instead of thinking, well, maybe no one's answering at all. But I'm sure they are, but we don't know.
It's a pretty deep question, but if you think about it, it's what funders and our county commissions and our city councils and our school principals and others are asking. It's like, so what? So you want people to be connected to each other. Why does that matter? And being able to answer that's pretty powerful.
This is Pam C. I don't know if I have a really good answer about why is it important that these families in crisis have a network, but I think that for me the most obvious is that there are so many things that are in their lives that they have no control over, and it shows in their child's behavior and their child's performance at school, just because the kids can pick up on that anxiety and that, Just the fact that we're in crisis. So if there was this network, then hopefully, maybe, those parents would then be able to control at least some of the things that are happening within the home and within the family members. And so then that would make it so that the kids could then feel more comfortable and they would then perform better, maybe not get into trouble, who knows. So I think there's a snowball effect. If you can make those parents feel like they can do something, there is something they are able to control or try anyway.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. And in fact, I think if you did some poking around, you would find some studies showing you that that is what happens. And you can use those to talk about that impact. And I think, what you're saying, I think those are things people care about. Kids being safe, kids not getting into trouble, parents having control and being able to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I think so too. And yeah, and that would be very hard to for just me to measure. So yeah, your suggestion of national models or national studies that have been done would be the way to go.
Yeah. And Mary Drew says Pam's right about the network being the key. Having a community with Mind in the Making as a basis will make people not feel isolated or alone. And Mary Drew, it's interesting because there are also studies showing what that does for people when they don't feel isolated. And there are national studies showing what happens to people when they do feel isolated. And there are some sort of critical problems or challenges facing our communities that have to do with isolation and have to do with people being in crises. And so what you were trying to do at the library is your one small step towards reducing that. Oh, see? Mary Drew, you can help Pam see. Does anyone else have anything they want to chime in before I go to the easier questions?
Yay! Thank you, Mary Drew. It's Kitty. Hello.
Excellent. Well, that moves nicely, Mary Drew, into deliverables, which is the third question, which is, what do you need to do or deliver to help your project achieve that outcome? So an outcome that seems to keep coming up that people really like is this idea of your participants connecting with each other and creating these networks. So what do you need to do as part of your project to make that happen? Those are your outputs. What do you think?
Maybe these are not the easier questions after all.
I mean, would an output just be having people actually show up to our workshop?
Yep, that would be an output.
I mean, if we could get, X number, we could set ourselves, a doable number of people that we would like to have there. And
yep.
if they could come and actually continue to come over the course of however many weeks we might want to do it.
Yep, exactly.
That would be fantastic. I mean, that's my greatest fear whenever I do a library program is that absolutely no one's going to come.
Mm-hmm. I don't think you're alone in that.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is an output that I would think about is making sure that the workshop sessions have opportunities for them to talk to each other in a non-threatening way. So that's why it's helpful to think about those outcomes that you want, because if that's the outcome you want, well, what conditions have to be in place for them to be able to connect with one another?
Oh, okay.
And Jeannie can speak to this maybe because she said that was an unexpected outcome. So clearly the way that she structured that book discussion allowed people to come together and talk to each other and connect. And are there things you could take from that and implement in your own workshop?
You know, I think one of the nicest things about it is that I actually have a timer and we run the book discussion group 1 hour. Then people who need to go can go, and people that would like to stay and talk can stay. My problem is that they're all staying and I have to throw them out.
That's a good
I
problem
have to
to
be
have,
back
though.
at 7:30. It is 9 o'clock. We've been here since 6:30. You people need to go home.
I think that would be a measure of success. So Mary Jo,
Yeah.
are you, I'm not sure what your question is. Do you just need a quick rundown on the difference between output and outcome? Is that what you are asking? Because they are very confusing, and actually people do tend to get those two confused. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. We were discussing outputs, but what I was talking about was how your outputs lead to your outcomes. So for instance, if I know that my outcome is I want people to connect with each other, that's my outcome, because it's a change in user behavior. They're connecting with each other where they weren't. Yep, exactly. Then my outputs are going to try and create opportunities for them to connect with one another. And I think it's those kinds of things that have made me appreciate logic models. And sometimes it just makes my brain hurt, and I'm thinking, oh, why did I sign up to do this? But I find that what I get from this is I'm much more precise in my project, and I'm much more thoughtful about what I do. I notice there's a real connection between how I organize it and what I get. And I also find that I can much more quickly, if someone challenges me and says, well, why is that project important? How does it really make a difference? I find I am much better able to explain why I think it has value and what the impact is and what changes I hope result as a come from my project. So the last one, maybe this one will be easy. What resources do you need to complete your projects? And this is, the staff, time, money. What resources do you need? I sort of gave you a big hint.
Yeah.
Yes, Megan.
Well, exactly what you said. Yeah, I was just going to say, so that's what you said it already. Yeah, that's right. And money.
I was trying to make it easy on you. Oh, here we go. Money is always good. Jeannie says we receive grant money from our friends, so all of the participants will be able to keep their copies of the book. And isn't that a great thing? I mean, if one of your outcomes are that they learn this, it's helpful for them to have the book to refer to in the future.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we just went through creating a logic model. Oh, here we go. I'm just going to take a look and see what Mary Drew had to say. Staff time to plan and organize and learn more about the club resources on Mind in the Making, the number of books to give out, and a good place to meet. So those are all good examples of input. So what you did, I mean, it was very painful, but all of you just created a logic model for a project that involves some kind of presentation or workshops for participants. And I just put mine into a spreadsheet, and it's kind of becomes my project charter. I don't do like an official project charter. That's kind of my project charter. This next tool that I'm going to show you is more about where I say who does what. And so I think I will really quickly pull up Asana here, and I'm going to share my screen with you. So I just want to say this is just one tool. And with all of these things, you need to find what works best for you. This happens to be something we use here in library development at the State Library. It may or may not work for you. It may be that for you, all you need is a simple spreadsheet. If it's kind of just you doing the bulk of the tasks, that might be great. Or you can even use your Outlook or your phone or pen and paper if that's how you're oriented. If you have a project that involves people from different organizations, then something like Asana or Trello might work well for you because it allows you to assign tasks to multiple people, and it allows you to set due dates on those tasks and have conversations about them and also upload files. And it shows you a calendar and timeline as well. The project I happen to have open right now is Aspen, which is our new library directory. Now, within the state library, only library development staff are on Asana, so I happen to be working on non-library development staff with this project. And I'm actually working with our IT staff, and so I'm assigned all the tasks, but I kind of was able to organize it in like testing period, prep before going live. We're working on a continuing education module, what training we need and what we need to do after going live. And you can see I also set myself deadlines as well. I wanted to kind of see all of the tasks, but I could also just say, I want to only see what's incomplete. And then that shows me what I need to do next. You can, and I will just go into, let's see if, I think we have Mind in the Making up here. Here's Mind in the Making. So this is what we used actually to plan the training and to follow up with you. Amelia happens to be the one assigned tasks, and we have different deadlines as well. But this is just one tool, and it has allowed us to kind of organize our thoughts and the actual nitty-gritty work of what we need to get done to make a project happen in one place, and to be able to assign it to other people and have the system kind of automatically check in with them. So we just wanted to show this to you so you could see one tool. I noticed that Mary Drew says that she's used Trello before, but the logic in my head does not match the logic in Trello. Yeah, I can relate, yes. Mary Drew. I still don't feel like I'm using Asana to its full capability, but I'm much closer than I was. That it takes a little bit of thinking differently. Has anyone else used another product that they thought was really helpful?
Pam Carlton says they will use Basecamp, which is something else that we did talk about. I think the shared catalog had talked about using Basecamp at one point.
Yeah. I think it's whatever tool works best for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and have Pam be the presenter again, because we don't want to spend a ton of time on Asana because you might not be at that point in your project, or you may have a different tool, but we did want to show you something practical that you could explore. There is a free version of Asana. We happen to pay for the premium version, but there is a free one that you can use. So Pam had said that evaluating your project is one of the phases in project management. The October webinar is about measuring project success. And so Joe and I are going to be teaching that one. Joe is very good at that kind of work, and I think she'll be able to give you some good hints and tips. If you are farther along in your project and you are at a place where you need to be measuring project success, you can feel free to get in touch with Joe or Amelia and I, and we would be happy to kind of talk to you about collecting data and how to look or how to measure success for your project. So if that's where you're at in the process, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. I don't want you to have to wait until October, although you can do that. And so I think we are kind of to our last slide. Which is just a thank you for your time, because I know even just taking an hour out of your day can be stressful these days. It just seems like everybody has a lot on their plate. And then just wanted to kind of give you these last few minutes to see if you had any questions for Pam or I. I'm not seeing any questions. And
we have answered everything, I guess.
They're confident and ready to go.
For sure.
Good job. I just have a quick question for you. On Aspen, who do I talk to? Because every time I go, I got registered and everything, but every time I go like to do event registration, you know,